end of the first cycle on the is at the cycle relating to the immense insights and the immense importance to all of us, inshallah, on the part of the spiritual works and impact of Shaykh al-Akbar Muhyiddin ibn Arabi. And before we delve into a more detailed assessment of his works, particularly his magnum opus, the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, or the Meccan revelations, as well as the summation and culmination of his spiritual edifice, namely the Fusus al-Hikam, or the bezels or jewels of wisdom, and his other works like Ruh al-Quds, Badr al-Fakhira, and Tarjuman al-Ashwaq, and the impact he had on his contemporaries and on his and on all the future course of development of tasawwuf, both in the Eastern as well as in the Western world. It would be worthwhile, I think, to commence with basically an exposition of his seerah, of his life, from both a historical as well as spiritual framework. Because I believe if we place Ibn Arabi, who is in many ways a universal figure, who is a figure who is both within and outside of time, if we place him also in the context of historical time, and we have an understanding of the chronology of his lifespan and how it has impacted on numerous people in numerous places, we will then begin to understand how his works can fit in with his life experience, and how his life experience also reflected in his work. Arabi was born in Murcia, which is a town in southern Spain now. It was a major town in Andalusia. At the time of great turbulence there, he was born of, and he's proud of it, of Arab lineage, of Arab parentage, and frequently in his works he discusses the lineage of his tribe, the lineage of his origins, and takes pride in the fact that he is from Arabia. He comes from a tribe called Ta'i. It's a famous Arab tribe in Yemen, which migrated after the conquests of early Islam into other parts of the Muslim world, and a branch of that reached into Spain. Spain was populated by two major migratory streams from the Arabian Peninsula, both from Yemen as well as from Syria. So the Arabs in Yemen, the Arabs in Andalusia, originated essentially from these two locations, Yemen and Syria. And the Ta'i tribe is a well-known tribe from Yemen. It is also known for its great figure in pre-Islamic history by the name of Haider and Qamar Naqvi, who is known in in pre-Islamic times as one of the generous, a figure who expresses generosity in its complete form. So the full name of Ibn Arabi is Muhyiddin Muhammad Abu Bakr Ibn Arabi al-Ta'i, al-Hatimi al-Ta'i. And later on it was added al-Mursi, which means from Murcia, and al-Andalusi, which means from Andalusia. His father was a well-known scholar and also important administrative figure in Murcia itself. Murcia at that point was a principality, a semi-independent principality, under the rule of a renegade prince by the name of Ibn Mardanish. And Ibn Mardanish ruled that principality really in isolation from the political trends and currents that were then prevalent in Andalusia. Andalusia at that point was at that point a transformation of power, or transfer of power from the Murabitun, the Al-Murabit dynasty, to the Al-Muhadun, or the Muhammad dynasty. And Ibn Madanish managed to keep Murcia outside of the conquests that were taking place by the Muhadun. He did that by frequent questionable alliances with nearby Christian powers. And the whole rule of Ibn Madanish has been considered in history, in subsequent history, as a rather ambiguous episode in the scene in Andalusia at that time. He was born in the 6th century Hijri, around the year 542, although the exact date has not yet been established. Ibn Madanish held out against the rulers of Andalusia who had established them in Seville for a number of years, but finally his conspiracy came under a sustained attack and it was absorbed into the Muhammad dynasty based in Seville. The Muhammad's father then moved from service to the court of Ibn Madanish to the court of the Sultan in Seville, a person by the name of Abu Aqib Yusuf Mansour. He lived with his family. That was when Ibn Arabi was about 7 or 8 years old. This was what the early chroniclers tell us about the movement of the family, the Ta'i family from Murcia to Seville. And Ibn Arabi also frequently refers to his early days in various sketches and various descriptions in his works. His works also should not be seen really in exact categorical form, because they span all kinds of things are inserted into his works. Early biography, descriptions of places he's been to, influence of his parents on him, and so on. So he himself gives quite a clear description of the movement of the family from Murcia to Seville, where his father came again into the service of the Sultan Mansour. From an early age we are told that Ibn Arabi exhibited certain spiritual insights. And his father, who was not a person who was completely within the path, he was a jurist and a scholar, nevertheless he appreciated and he understood the gifts that his son had. And he put him very early on into the custody of people who could teach him the elements of the deen, the elements of his first spiritual experience. He also talked about a certain dissolute youth that he had. Now, I'm not sure whether this was in the classic way in which great men on the path switch from being in a state of extreme sensuality and physical debasement into being suddenly men of enlightenment. But he does refer in few places about the waywardness of his youth, that apparently did not last long, and at the age of around 15 or 16 he had his first spiritual insight, his first spiritual experience in a Seville cemetery. He used to frequent cemeteries where he became in a state of true intoxication. We are told that he became immediately a majhul, that is a person who was suddenly, his entire being was seized by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and without the need or without the necessity of going through the various cycles and stages and maqams that the seeker will go through. So the jadba, the magnetism by which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala drew him had such a powerful impact on him that he immediately understood the totality of being within the divine presence at a very, very early age. And he says also in his biography, or his semi-biography, autobiography, which is called Ruh al-Quds, that in mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he released him from the jannah. Most majloobs are seized by that state and stay in that state. They are unable to go back to their original nature or their original condition. He was returned to the state of being a seeker, of being an initiator, having gone through the experience of being cast all of a sudden in the Hava Rabbaniya, within the divine presence. Therefore, he made a vow, and he says that in his visions he recognized that he was one of the walis, and he was guided at that point, he says, by the Prophet Isa, Jesus himself. And between in Arabi and the Prophet Isa will be noted throughout our later discussions, inshallah. You will see that the figure of Isa, of the Prophet Jesus, is central to the cosmic order and the spiritual order and hierarchy established by the kashf, the unveiling that came to humanity. At that point also, at a very early age, he decided to abandon all worldly possessions, and since he had no teacher, no sheikh, he gave all his possessions, which were all free, few to his father for safekeeping. And it is from that time onwards, from the age of around 16, 17, until the day he died, Ibn Arabi had no possessions of any note. He did not rely on anyone for his sustenance, for his rizq, except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He possessed nothing. When he died, he left only his clothes and his turban. So his father took the charge and accepted the visitations that Ibn Arabi had, and began to accept that his son had spiritual gifts and insights that were unique, and they are probably unique in the entire history of the annals of Islam outside of the realm of the prophets and the imams. This patient is unique. Chosen the way of seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and having been thrust into divine presence at a very, very early age, he started his seeking for those who could guide him further along the disciplines of the path. As I said, he was initially a majnun, but he was brought back to the station of being a beginner, a salik, like all of us. He then began to frequent the company of the great sheikhs of those of us in the East who were raised in the East, even in those days, who are not aware or familiar with the figures of those of Rijal who were from the Maghreb or from Andalusia. They were not known to us in the East, but in Arabi, in response to a statement by a sheikh from Erbil later on in his life, that Andalusia and the Maghreb were devoid of great beings, wrote his famous work, which has been translated by a man called Austin. It's called Sufis of Andalusia, where he lists in great detail the names of all the great shuyukh whom he met, and all the great shuyukh who influenced him and who were instrumental in his moving along the path. Some of the names that he mentioned in his works would be known to us now, but in those days there were certain central figures in his evolution along the path, and his greater growth of his spiritual insights. He took as his first sheikh a person who was completely literate, a Berber by the name of Abdullah ibn Arabi, and who was a shepherd or a part-time shepherd and farmer from the Algarve region of Andalusia. This is what is now southern Portugal. It's known in Arabic as Al-Gharb, which means the westernmost part of Andalusia. He received, he says, from that sheikh of his, Abdullah ibn Arabi, great insights and great stations. From there, he moved on to other shuyukh and other teachers in Andalusia, and at quite an early age, probably before his 20s, he was known as a person of insight, of great awareness. And he was asked by the famous philosopher, he was asked to be seen by the famous philosopher Ibn Rushd or Averroes, who wanted to see what kind of being this person was. And the first confirmed meeting between the philosopher Ibn Rushd and Ibn Arabi took place when Ibn Arabi was probably around 15, 16. And apparently Ibn Rushd recognized that the knowledge that Ibn Arabi had was a knowledge of great veracity and could easily overwhelm the knowledge that he had. The famous anecdote is that when he met him, Ibn Rushd said to Ibn Arabi, yes. Ibn Arabi also said to him, yes, but then he said no. And by this, the yes and no, then yes, you are a man of wisdom, but no, the knowledge of philosophy, the knowledge and wisdom that comes from philosophy and speculation and speculative reasoning cannot equate to the knowledge that comes from kashf or unveiling of shahada. And Ibn Rushd apparently was thunderstruck by that. Later on, Ibn Arabi refers to this meeting in his Futuhat al-Makkiyah, but talks about a subsequent meeting also with Ibn Rushd, where he says quite categorically that the knowledge that Ibn Rushd had, that is the knowledge of philosophy, the knowledge of reasoning, Ibn Rushd was probably the greatest Islamic interpreter of Aristotle, and all of the Aristotelian works passed through him into Western Europe. He confirmed the primacy of kashf and unveiling, the primacy of revelatory knowledge, and knowledge that comes from shuhud, that is witnessing, over knowledge that comes from reasoning and that comes from. And began probably one of the greatest spiritual sojourns in the history of Islam, and it's comparable in my mind to the physical travels of the great Ibn Battuta, that Ibn Arabi traveled in true siyaha. He talks about the siyaha, which is the progress of the pilgrim, the progress of the seeker towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All of his trips, all of his journeys, all of his visits, after the age of 17, 18, were only for the purpose of gaining greater knowledge and insights, greater gnosis, greater awareness, greater enlightenment. And they were all fi sabilillah. They were not there because he wanted to see the sights and sounds, or hear the sounds of the great cities of Islam. His first visits were naturally nearby to Maghreb or Morocco. Morocco at that point was organically linked with Andalusia. In fact, Andalusia came under the political control of the two great dynasties that I referred to earlier, the Murabitun and the Muwahhidun, who were actually Berber dynasties based in Marrakesh. And they ruled both Morocco, parts of western Algeria, as well as Andalusia. So Andalusia was politically under the domination of Morocco, and there was a great deal of traffic between the two. There were daily several sailings, for example, from the port of Algeciras, which in Arabic is Jazira al-Khadra, the Green Islands, which is the southernmost ports of Andalusia, to Sabta or Ceuta, which was the main port facing it on the North African coast. And he began to frequent the places where the great sages of that time could be found in North Africa, particularly Morocco. And he wandered through Sabta, through Fars, and down to Marrakesh. At that point, we are told that he came under the initiatory guidance of the great Shaykh Abu Madian. Abu Madian, as we all know, is the ultimate head of the Shadli order. Although Abu Hassan al-Shadli, the Shadli order to Shadli world community, is by Abu Hassan al-Shadli. Nevertheless, the teachers of Abu Hassan al-Shadli go back to Abu Madian. Abu Madian was one of the great gnostics of his time. The Arabi says he never met Abu Madian in corporeal form, but he met him in a spiritual state. But he also came under the instructions of the disciples of Abu Madian. And there are a number of stories, all of them confirmed, by the way, of disciples approaching Ibn Arabi under the instructions of Abu Madian, whom he was never met physically, and being asked to seek him out and to transfer to him the wisdoms that came to Abu Madian. Abu Madian began to have also great influence with the Muwahhidun, Abu Ya'qub Yusuf al-Mansur, who towards the end of his life became more and more ascetic and began to frequent the company of Sufis, and particularly wanted to be in the vicinity of Medina. There is a link, there's a very strong link between the part of the initial true knowledge that an Arabi had with the Sharqi order. And the Sharqi order now in North Africa is probably the one that encompasses in its roots the wisdom and the gnosis that was brought to the path by an Arab. His travels took him, as I said, back and forth between Morocco and Andalusia, although his main base obviously was then in Seville. And in Seville he began to develop a very, very large discipleship and following. And he became more and more confirmed in the parallel world that existed for him and exists for all Arabs. That is the world, the imagined world, the world of rumuz, of symbols, the world of insights, the world of meanings, the world of the non-sensory world. And to him, that universe began to open more and more and more. And he said, the first opening came to him when he read the Quranic verse, Allah says, my earth is vast, of the wasi'ah, and the vastness of Allah's earth is not this physical. To him, it's the vastness of all the universes that have been formed as part of the creation design of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he had the keys to that universe. So the vastness of Allah's earth is not the world that we have around us. It is not the geographic limitation, but he had the key into entering that universe, the universe of the imaginal world, the universe of symbols, the universe of meanings, where the physical becomes spiritual and the spiritual becomes physicalized. So he began to have insights, and he could see in the meaning of things, he could see into things, he could see the significance of things. And it was part of the immeasurable gift of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to whom in particular, that he had that access at that point. And that is when he began to pour out all of his visions, all of his experiences, all of his true, real, haqiqi experiences in this universe of the imaginary world. He started pouring out his writings, and his writings continued unabated until his death. And when the day or the day before his death, he was writing the final draft, or revising the final draft of his famous Meccan Revelations. His works number in the hundreds. They range from 2 or 3 page tracts to multi-volume works, and it was incredible that all of them could be produced by one man, but there was indisputed authorship of his. He then began to wander slightly further away from the Moroccan Andalusian axis, and made his first journey into a place called Africa, which is Tunis, where he met the sage of his time, a person by the name of Mahdi, Shaykh al-Mahdi. And he was in his circle in Tunis for several years, possibly 2 or 3 years. And there he had, with him as his companion, he had many experiences with the wayfarers and seekers, and was their guardian. He says he has seen him in several cases and instances, one of them where the Prophet gave in Arabi the investiture of being the Shaykh of his time. Going back and forth to Andalusia, and at about the age of 30, his father passed away. He had no brothers, as far as we know. There was no mention of him having a brother throughout his works. We know that he had 2 sisters, and apparently he was extremely fond of his sisters, and after his father died, they all asked him to come back to Andalusia from Tunis to take over responsibility for them and for the family as a whole. And for a period of time, he came under strong family pressure to do something about his family and about his 2 sisters, and that was the time where he became more involved in the affairs of the world. He visited Marrakesh several times, and we are told he managed to find 2 husbands for the 2 family ended, and he went back to his spiritual sojourn. We are told he made the final decision to leave to the east sometime in the year 592, where he embarked with a person who was a faithful colleague of his by the name of Badr al-Habashi, who stayed with him throughout his travels in the east and before the Arabi. So he had this faithful companion with him throughout the latter part of his life. But the name Badr al-Habashi means that the man was probably an Ethiopian. And it is at that time, before he moved to the east, that he began to experience the way in which the cosmic order is structured around the pole, the qutb of the time, and the role of the pole in terms of the reflection of the planet. The corners of creation, the 4 corners of creation, what are known as the autad, being carried by the perfected beings of his time. He said we had met all these 4 autads, 2 of them in Spain and the other 2 in Mecca, and the substitutes or the abdal for these autads. So each of these people, inshallah we'll talk about that later, the meaning of the pole or the qutb and the cosmology of Ibn Arabi, or the autad, the pillars that keep creation continuing, and how they are reflected both in the spiritual as well as in the physical sense by actual beings, and the substitutes, the 7 substitutes for each of these, and to see in his own mushahada these designs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And move from his final sojourn towards the east, when he never returned back to the Western Islamic world, sometime, as I said, in the year 592, where he moved from Tunis to Cairo. He came to Cairo at a time of great distress. Again, the Crusaders had been ejected out of Jerusalem, but had managed to make a comeback, and they were beginning also to encroach on parts of the empire, which was then under the rule of Saladin's sons and nephews and grandnephews. And in Cairo itself, there was a period of great famine there, and the city was dominated by a very, very strong and prevalent all kinds of diseases. And there was the famous plague of Cairo of the year 592, where apparently 90% of the population died. So he came really under in times of great hardships. There he met with some of the Andalusian exiles. Andalusia was at that point beginning to be affected by the Reconquista in Spain. So a lot of Andalusian families, both from precautionary reasons as well as those whose lands were overrun by the Christians, began to emigrate eastwards. Most of them tended to settle in Alexandria and Cairo. Some found their way east. Wandering, the Cairene Andalusians began to congregate around him, and they formed a small coterie which then moved on to Mecca. That is where he began to experience the revelations that were finally put together in the book Al-Futuhat al-Makki, or the volumes of Futuhat al-Makki, of Meccan revelations. That the first experiences we had about the overwhelming significance of the Kaaba to him is when he saw there an emissary from the Ghaib, and of the perfect youth, who carried in him the entire, as it were, the entire grammar or the language of the Futuhat al-Makki. We have to understand that in Arabi should not be related to our own understanding of what physical reality is. We're talking about a person who was in a different sphere of existence, in a different universe, a different realm of being. And when he talks about the youth who carried in him the body of the Quran, we should not think of it in terms of a person just expounding Quran verses. We should think of it in terms of the imagined world and the if we can ever be in that state, if we can ever be in that high, inshallah, we'll be able to relate to the symbols and to the laws of that universe. So the language of the great Shaykh is the language of a person who is basically describing to us a land that we have not yet visited. It's like a person who's going to the other side of Mars and comes back to describe to us what he has seen. We'll probably find it very difficult to relate in terms of his terminologies, in terms of his experiences, unless we have been there. So to some extent, the way in which we approach it in Arabic, the way that we will discuss it, inshallah, we'll have to assume that it's not that we suspend our reason. We have to assume that the realm in which he is living, the realm that he's expanding on, is a realm that is not perceptible to us in the physical, rational sense, but can only be experienced by those who have reached the shores of that universe. So in Mecca, we began to receive the inspirations and the visions that form the basis of the Futuhat al-Makkiyah. Several years in Mecca, daily tawaf, daily circumambulation around the Kaaba, the insights and visions in spring of enormous visitations that it is really quite hard for the mind to understand how one person can be so graced by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is outside of the spectrum of prophets and imams. It was also at that point where Ibn Arabi begins to talk about the significance of wilayah. Inshallah we'll discuss that later. The concept of wilayah, which has been translated poorly, I think, as sainthood, in reality it means the friendship or proximity of friendship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is the single most important that Ibn Arabi has left us to understand the hierarchy of the being of beings within the divine purpose. And there he reaches the final definition of what a wali is. And it is there that he begins to, in Mecca, that he begins to define the difference between nubuwwah, which is prophecy, nubuwwah al-tashri', which is the prophecy related to legislation or legislative prophecy, and nubuwwah al-mutlaqa, the continuing prophecy, and where he confirms that the prophecy of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was an absolute end of all legislative prophecy. It is the end of all nubuwwah al-tashri'. There is, though, the notion of wilayah or the friendship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is part and parcel of all prophets. Nevertheless, has a station in its own right. And as the Prophet ﷺ was the final culmination of the legislative nubuwwah or the legislative prophecy, so in wilayah there must be also a seal, there must also be a khatam. And it is there that he develops the concept which has become, I think, central to understanding the whole spectrum of the cosmology or the spiritual cosmology of Ibn Arabi, is the difference between the Khatam al-Anbiya or the seal of prophecy and the Khatam al-Awliya, which is the seal of sainthood. Ibn Arabi has frequently been accused of denying the primacy of prophecy over sainthood. This is not what he said. He has confirmed that the prophet as prophet is at a greater station, a higher station than a wali. Wilayah is incorporated in prophecy. The prophecy of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is the end of all legislative prophecy. There is no other means by which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would wish us to manage and order our lives except within the shara or the way of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. However, each prophet has a reflection of his spirit, as it were. The spirit of that particular prophet, that unique feature of that prophet, continues in the form of a wali. And each of the prophets in history has a certain association with his function. For example, the Prophet Isa has a certain emphasis or a certain concentration on the prophecy of mercy. It is a non-legislative prophecy. The prophecy of Ibrahim alayhi salam is a prophecy relating to the station of friendship and proximity and generosity. That spirit that is within the context of that prophet carries on in time through a wali or through a friend of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who is with us. The prophecy of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is an absolute combination of all the attributes and all the qualities of the previous prophets. Therefore, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was a combination of all the various strands of each of the prophets into one. He considered himself to be the seal of the Muhammadan wilayah. That is, the wilayah associated with the combination of all the attributes associated with particular prophets that culminated in the prophecy of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, had as its counterpart the culmination or the seal of the wilayah that he represented. And he had visitations, he had confirmations, and he had assurances of that by a famous vision that he had, where he saw the entire spectrum of prophets congratulating him for being the seal of the Muhammadan wilayah. He says that there are three types of walis. There is with us now a wali who represents the prophecy of each of the prophets, with the exception of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He considered himself to be that seal. He also says that at the end of time there will be a seal of all the universal saints, that he calls al-wilaya mutlaqa, and that will be the last man, the last person on this earth who is recognizably human, who has in him the divine spark, who recognizes his absolute servanthood to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in a state or in a condition where the entire universe is populated by people who are completely disassociated from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is the last saint, and that is the last seal of the universal sainthood, and that is as the Yalla Adam was the beginning of prophecy, the physical prophecy, then the last man, that is the last man who recognizes the Shahada, who recognizes his absolute servanthood to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, becomes the end, the culmination of humanity. And at that point, he says, the cycle of creation ends. His end of creation is not as a result of all kinds of catastrophic events taking place. It is very much, I think, to how we would believe creation would end. It will end when humanity or human beings lose their divine spark. At that point, creation ends by its very nature, because there is no one there to recognize the supremacy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala except Allah. So, wilayah and the whole notion of sainthood came to him previously, obviously, but it came to him in his fulsome fashion while he was in Mecca during the Meccan revelations. And this has caused the greatest confusion, I think, and the greatest single reason why most of the jurists and most of modern day Islamists and modernists tend to think of Ibn Arabi. They tend to denounce him by basically not understanding, in fact distorting what he said. He does not, never does Ibn Arabi say that wilayah is greater than prophecy. Never does he put man above the angelic forces. Never does he claim that the nubuwwah or the prophecy associated with legislative prophecy does not end with the Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And neither does he ever state that he is the universal seal, that he is the man who culminates all knowledge. He says that he is the seal of the Muhammadan wilayah. That is, he is the person who could best expound, after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the entire amalgamation of prophethood as it's corporealized in man. born from Mecca and wanders throughout the Eastern Muslim world. You see him one day in Cairo, the next day in Aleppo, the third day in Damascus, the fourth day in Turkey, which was then the Seljuk Empire. You see him, he goes to Baghdad where he meets Shahabuddin Sahrawardi. He goes to Konya. There in Mecca, the founder of the person who became his single most important disciple in the East and is the bridge between the thoughts and works and the station of Ibn Arabi and the whole corpus of Eastern Tasawwuf, particularly that associated with Iran and Shia Gnosis. And that's by a person by the name of Qamar, Sadruddin Qamar. He married Sadruddin's mother and he became therefore his stepfather and raised him as a son. And Qamar was probably the single closest murid that Ibn Arabi had. And he is the most important translator and transferer of Ibn Arabi's knowledge and wisdom to the whole Eastern world, to another group of people, inshallah, when we will talk about it. We see then Ibn Arabi moving from Mecca, wandering throughout the Eastern Muslim world, and he spent some time in Anatolia, in a place called Malatya, for about 2 or 3 years. Then he moves into Syria, and in his last years he's found in Damascus, where he has around him a core of perhaps 20 or 30 disciples. And there in Damascus he marries the daughter of the Maliki Qadi. Ibn Arabi's madhab may have been towards the end that of the Maliki right, but we know he is also influenced by Ibn Hazm, and to some extent his outer obligations were done according to the then Bahiri sect. In Damascus he comes under the protection of a famous family called the Zakis, Bani Zakis, where they give him a house and they give him the necessary protection against those ulama and jurists who are always out on the lookout for transgressions and for people who might have overstepped the boundaries. And for the last few years in his life, he lives a contemplative life, reflective life, with a number of disciples around him, and was recognized in Damascus as being one of his time. A number of stories relating to the way he died. It's most likely that he died in a natural way, without anything untoward. But the stories that have passed over time is that he was giving a talk in one of the mosques, and some of the ulamas attacked him. And then he said, in answer to them, he said, "The God that you worship is under my feet." And apparently, in a state of rage, they attacked him and killed him. This is, I believe, an apocryphal story, and most of the modern historians and biographers tend to disclaim that. In any case, they say that where he died, they dug his grave there and then and found a pot of gold, which meant that the God that they worshipped was under his feet, which is the pot of gold. And that story continued in time until the Ottoman Sultan Salim into Damascus in the 16th century, where the story was revived, as it were, and was another tradition associated with the rediscovery of Shaykh Fadhllalla's tomb, where Sultan Salim then brought the remains to a mosque, magnificent mosque, not in terms of its size, but in terms of its design. It's an exquisite gem in one of the minor bazaars of Damascus. And any of you who go to Damascus, I think should make a point of visiting. The seerah of Ibn Arabi and the story was part of the Habash of Khalifa even then. Although some attempts were made by the Khalifa Nasr bin Mullah to try to stop or to stem the tide of disintegration, and he died a few years before the great calamity of the early Muslim world, which is the Mongol invasion. He lived at a time of great change and great turbulence, and it may have had some impact on the way that he chose to travel, or the way that he moved from town to town, from country to country, but it probably had a minor impact on his own witnessing, his own kashf. At the same time, he encompassed in his seerah the true purpose of travel. The purpose of travel then was in order to seek enlightenment, in order to be more illuminated by the nur of Allah, by the light of Allah. And the whole notion of siyah, which, as I've said earlier, is now translated as tourism, was there only for people to gain greater insights and greater confirmations of their state of servitude, their absolute servitude to Allah. And his travels were the finest expression of a true seeker, a seeker of inner enlightenment, a seeker of the way to Allah, because he wandered from place to place, from town to town, from country to country, truly without any thought as to his provision, as to his rizq, and absolutely with no fear of any created being, with only fear and submission towards Allah. The legacy that he had was not really experienced, but possibly 20 or 30 years after his death. And it's an important period of transition, because during that 20 or 30 years, his disciples, especially Haider and Qamar, began to propagate his works, his visions, and formed the fundamental bridge between the insights that comes to a man in true Tawheed and the whole world of tasawwuf, both in its Sunni form as well as in the Shia gnostic form. And it is that period of respite, as it were, 20 or 30 years before the ulama woke up to the import of his writings, that allowed this to be confirmed to Qamar, Haider and Qamar Naqvi, Iraqi, and all those people who subsequently became masters in their own right and became the essential bridge between tasawwuf, Westerners and the East, and the universe, as it were, the great gnostic architecture brought to the path by Ibn Arabi, and all of the great paths, all of us inshallah on the path, all inestimable vector. Are there any questions or?